A spiritual soul journey can have many twists and turns along the way. For High Priest Kwatamani, the latter days of the 1970s were a time of preparation that seeded the unfolding of the prophetic 9/18/27 spiritual chronology. Those who have encountered High Priest Kwatamani through these many years often refer to him as a prophetic revealer. For good reason. High Priest Kwatamani was a research lecturer at the University of Ghana, Legon. Within the African Studies Department, he functioned under the directorship of Professor Kwatamani, the profound African musicologist. High Priest Kwatamani had first encountered Professor Ikatia in the late 60s, early 70s at UCLA. It was the memories of a song his great-grandmother would sing that connected him to the Fanti of West Africa. During his lectures, High Priest Kwatamani emphasized the research findings of Cheikh Anton Diop, the highly acclaimed Senegalese scholar who specialized in the archaeological and linguistic connections of our sacred ancestral Kemetic garden culture origins as green earth solar conscious beings, the first genesis of man, he and she. Within this unified field of comprehension, High Priest Kwatamani highlighted the stolen legacies of our ancestral consciousness, citing the seminal works of George G.M. James. At the conclusion of each lecture, High Priest Kwatamani asked those present to envision that first intercourse between and among the most supreme seen and unseen essence of masculine and feminine energy. The Big Bang emergence, strong and powerful enough to forward our presence as tree of life consuming children of the sun. Genesis 1. Birthed within the cradle of a sacred garden cultural environment. Sunshine, vegetation, sparkling waterways, and the warm breeze of a temperate climate as the root base and foundation of divine social, economic, family, communal order, preserved within the nature, the neter of Ma'at, higher peace consciousness.
So you say you need something to step to. Better watch what you say and who you say it to. 'Cause the High Priest Kwatamani will give you something to step to.
Yeah, this piece here, well, this a love song. Syncopated and orchestrated for you to step on. For the big, bad, and bold who think they're full grown. Foot loose and fancy free with a mind of their own. For the bad mama jammers who stone cold to the bone, doing the wrong thing right and the right thing wrong.
High Priest Kwatamani brought forward a revolutionary nature of energy in motion. So said Professor Ikatia, the staff, students, councils of elders in various villages, and others who attended his lectures, both on and off campus. His message emphasized the supreme truth of our first genesis as green earth solar conscious beings, man, he, and she, beyond belief systems. The High Priest would transform traditional favorites, such as fufu, kinky, gari, and kiliwili, into delicious raw and living dishes. Those present could reason that the High Priest Kwatamani's tree of life consumption patterns actually related to the way our sacred ancestors consumed, even though the controlling mindset of colonial rule and the demoralizing enslavement systems thereof served to destabilize sacred ancestral consumption patterns and family communal order. Presentations included the exciting intensity of spoken word, music, and dance. High Priest Kwatamani, along with the Kwatamani African Saints, a performing arts collective, did collaborate with his dear brethren Niarte, director of the Ghana Dance Ensemble, to express the rising consciousness of whole life energy. And this ancestral cultural connection of spiritually revolutionary energy inspired an inner call for whole life recovery. It was June 4th, 1979. Uprisings of military might sent shockwaves through the minds of the masses. The high priest continued to echo the need for spiritual detoxing, purging, and healing. While many were confronting the appearance of social, economic, political, and religious agendas, the high priest Kwatamani spoke about the need for a whole life recovery of our sacred ancestral first Genesis consciousness as the key to resurrecting the holistic living way of life, divine, social, economic, family, communal order. The high priest took a leave from the university due to circumstances in the diaspora. The first intercourse in Mount Airy, Philadelphia, was a happening. It was a spiritual hub that provided the fuel for a sacred ancestral surge. Consciousness bearers, those who crossed the threshold and consumed the nature of whole life energy as a work in progress. Holistic, comedic practitioners, spiritual seekers from all walks of life. The Essenes, the 12 tribes, the 5 percenters, Akibalan Academy, MOVE organization, the Republic of New Africa, the Baha'i, Buddhists, Hare Krishnas, Hebrew Israelites, Black Panthers, Muslims, Garveyites, the Harambe House, Asara practitioners, Seventh-day Adventists, politicians, celebrities, naturopaths such as Dr. Sebi, Dr. Layla Africa, Dr. Aris Latham, and many other noted conscious consumers, inclusive of Dick Gregory, Muta Baruka, Sweet Honey in the Rock, Teddy Pendergrass and the Teddy Bears, Sonia Sanchez, Karen Warrington, WDAS, Mumia Abu Jamal, Baba Ashangi and the Ashangi Dancers, classical jazz pianist Alfie Pollard, Brother Justice Zuga, and Brother David Jarara, to name just a few. Long before many could even recognize the encodes, High Priest Kwatamani served as a messenger regarding the holistic living requirements of Prophecy 9:18-27. The number 9 symbolizing completion, totality, and the beginning of a new cycle. The millennial turn from 1999 signaled the count during the gathering time of 3 cycles of 9, 2009, 2018, 2027. The 3rd cycle of 9, a most supreme unseen preparation.
Take a few minutes, groove with this groove, and let this smooth love song take you to school where truth lyrics are the golden rule.
Historical documentation has been meticulously preserved through the extensive scholarship of Dr. Heru Setepinra Hekimta in his doctoral dissertation presented to Temple University Department of African American Studies, entitled Ankh Ujda Seneb, Life, Strength, Health. Let Food Be Thy Medicine, an epistemic examination on the genealogy of the Africana holistic health tradition, with preliminary considerations in the city of Philadelphia, 1967 to the present. High Priest Kwatamani, in those times known as Brother Kofi Kwatamani. And I quote, "Who were the heavyweights?" Answer given by Zakia Ali. At that time you had Aris and you had Brother Kofi. Kofi had a restaurant here called the First Intercourse. And not only was he doing raw food, which was exciting, but Kofi was polygamist. He had a harem of women that brothers loved, and when you went to the spot, it was pillows on the floor, material hanging, and you had all these beautiful black women walking around serving you on trays and stuff. That turned some heads on a couple of different levels, but he and Aris were the beginning. Aris was in New York, and Kofi was here. According to Aris Latham, quote, High Priest Kwatamani was the first individual to offer raw food cuisine to the African community in Philadelphia in the 1970s. The name of the salubrious food establishment in Philadelphia was entitled First Intercourse, and it offered to its customers dishes named in reverence of ancient Nile Valley culture, such as the Kings and Queens loaf, the Nile Valley Kush High Supreme, the Royal Kemetic Salad, the Pharaoh's Loaf, among others. High Priest Kwatamani, supreme soothsayer, soul seer, spiritual healer and revealer, chief elder of the Kwatamani First Genesis tribe, the oldest, longest sustained, raw and living, plant fuel consuming, family community order known. Well over half a century and still going strong in the tropical rainforest.
We owe so much to our sacred ancestors. There's so much within the DNA memory bank, so much within the subconscious state of mind. There's so much that we continue to encounter as we move through the spaces and places of time. So many among man, he, and she has forgotten our sacred ancestral origin. So many have forgotten the nature of energy from which we come as green earth solar conscious beings. You see, there's been so much conflict, confusion, and chaos thrown into the cycle of thought and reasoning and actions that man, he, and she has begun to engage in attitudes, values, behaviors that are inspired and orchestrated by belief systems. And in most cases, these particular belief systems are inspired by one's individualistic desire to belong to something greater than oneself. You see, man, he, and she are communal by nature. Man, he, and she are social creatures. Therefore, instinctually, he and she need to feel a part of something greater, something bigger, something larger, something communal in thought, reasonings, and actions. Since man, he, and she are communal by nature, to disrupt or interfere or interrupt with that divine social, economic, family, communal nature automatically throws man, he, and she into a divisive state, breaking the holistic living network of family communal order. If that family communal order is broken, the individual then becomes isolated, separated, divided, conquered, ruled by a nature that actually fuels off of his or her life energy to maintain its own existence. We're talking about a lower and lesser nature of energy that thrives and survives off of broken family units, where offsprings are born in households absent of fathers or absent of mothers, broken from that holistic living network of communal order, where there are those within that family communal network that are capable, ready, willing, and able to substitute in the event one or the other parent happens to be missing in action. If we cannot get this clear and move toward establishing strong and vibrant divine, social, economic, family, communal order, where we depend on each other, growing our foods, developing networks that will express our artistic, cultural values, and utilize our creative tools to uphold and maintain that infrastructure, interfacing and interrelating with other family communal networks. If these things are broken, one is left in isolation, bent, broken, lost, and astray in a lower and lesser state of thought, reasoning, and action that keeps self-deified individualism as the primary goal and objective of each and every one who no longer sincerely care about the generation next. All one's focus is on one's self. I mean my mind. No feeling about parenting relationships. Just focus on what self wants to accomplish for oneself in a dead-end reality where the offsprings are left to follow the same trail down the same lower and lesser vibration into oblivious nothingness. Our ancestors has given us holistic living reasoning, and we must pay close attention to those teachings that are expressed in thought, in reasoning, and in action. So when the I began back in the day in the 60s and forward to manifest a happening, the primary focus was recovery. The fact that we would have to be the change if we sincerely and holistically wish to see the change. And that it became an absolute necessity for us to teach the principles, morals, and values of holistic living change by example. Since man, he and she have been twisted, forced, coerced, and otherwise beat, tortured, raped into a second Genesis state of flesh and blood consuming, hunting, herding, warring, tribal energies, which stands opposed to our first Genesis, sacred garden, cultural, family, communal order. We would have to recover from that toxic nature that actually has groomed and conditioned mass populations to believe that dead, devitalized, and depleted fuel substance is soul food. The holistic living fact is that we're talking about stripping, ripping the soul out of whole life energy and then reversing truth into a massive deception that will come to be believed to be truth. We're facing a heck of a challenge, and we do not have any time to waste anymore.
There's some deep-seated program that you must let go, and we don't have any time to waste anymore. Without a hoop, a holler, and a lot of to-do, use this supreme truth to step two.
When that basic social infrastructure of divine social economic family communal order was broken down into its least common denominator and scattered, those bent and broken populations did seek to belong, to feel a sense of significance, a sense of connection. And so when one encounters a force that inflicts conflict, confusion, and chaos against one's natural and innate communal state of being, demoralizing one's unified relationship as man, he, and she, the bond of communal order becomes broken. And within this broken state, she or he is willing to follow whatever one believes will relieve one from the suffering, grueling misery, aches, and pains that one is feeling.
Moving through the streets, always on the run. Pistol Pete, Karen, Heat, and every other daughter or son has become a master con. Like a predatory leash, sucking you like a sponge, stealing your life energy and leaving you with none. And you better move fast and quick, better stay on the run, cause every bad mamma jammer out there got a gun. Kicking ass and taking name is a gangbanger's fun. And the way this story is wrote, hardly anybody can cope. So everybody seeking, searching out a ray of hope, trying to relieve the mental stress and strain and the misery, aches, and pains from the baggage they tote. Some would sniff and start and smoke some dope. Some would preach and teach and fool some folk. Some would seek and search a hole to stroke. Some would beat the meat. Some would seek out dead and devitalize something to eat.
We are identifying the attitudes, values, behaviors, and beliefs of that nature which opposes divine order and shows clearly through its actions that it glorifies the ideology of all things being fair in love and war. The deceptions of a love-hate syndrome to keep man, he, and she in a state of a sleeper. We're talking about a socially transmitted traumatizing disease inflicted against that being and every offspring born off of that being. Let us remember that it is the feminine she who is the first teacher, and that the first classroom begins in her womb, that primary and initial gathering point, where the DNA encodes of that male and the DNA encodes of that female come together to produce new life in his and her own image, of his and her own mixed and mingled kind, within his and her own mixed and mingled state of mind. What happens when he and she has been so divided, so separated, so ruled that they cannot interconnect with the soul-to-soul relationship necessary for whole life resurrection? Remember this: together we stand, divided we fall. The adverse effects upon the generation next, after the draw is formed, will adversely affect one and all. You simply separate the masculine from the feminine. You reduce the masculine to a lower and lesser state of mental, physical, and spiritual consciousness. In fact, the oppositional state of disorder seeks and searches to destroy him psychologically, using any means deemed necessary. We're talking spiritual war, which means the primary goal and objective of that oppositional nature of energy is to keep him engrossed in conflict, confusing, chaos, fright, fear, a psychological horror story. And when that occurs, that opposing nature of energy takes control of the feminine essence, reducing her to a state of consciousness where she feels hopeless, helpless, actually having no sense of connection with anything meaningful. Then the forces of assimilation, integration, and adaptation is given to her as a gift, something to allow her to belong to that opposing nature of energy that continues to do the do that it do, to suck, sap, and drain the life energy out of you.
Hell, oh yeah, the steel and pale game stone cold to the bone, and the suntan children won't leave this thing alone. Just can't seem to figure out where it went wrong and why this steel and pale game has been going on for so long. No, I ain't gonna end this love song here in the midst of this doo-doo, leaving you empty, ignorant, sad, and blue. I'm gonna take a moment and let the priest sing to you, and then I'm gonna come back and give you something to step to.
Mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters, game playing within an insane game, ducking and dodging each other, headed for self-destruction in the fast lane. And with absolutely nothing divine to step to, deadly destruction has a point-blank aim. And our sacred spiritual essence is what this pale game will claim. I praise Kwatamani, I praise Kwatamani, the ancestral mother spirit is requesting that you give us more divine spirit inside to step to.
Oh, sing it, baby. If I didn't say it before, I now say to you, get natural, raw, and rare, and take a breath of fresh air, and let this supreme truth talk to you.
She, the feminine essence, the mother spirit, is the epitome of communal order. She's the birthplace of all of we. Once she's reduced to that lower and lesser state of thinking and reasoning and actions, she then begins to do whatever is necessary to be accepted. She will alter her body parts. She will perm, press, dye her hair, skin. In fact, she will go to the extreme to show her loyalty, her obedience, her idolizing worship of that opposing nature of energy that violates the sanctity of her nurturing essence. An opposing nature of energy that is deified into a God complex, which invades the consciousness of all who consume of it, disconnecting he and she from their sacred ancestral first Genesis reality, reducing them into a lower and lesser state of being. We're talking about that virus-like nature of self-deifying individualism that converts all who consume of the I, me, my, mine syndrome into a reflection of its own image, of its own kind, of vengeful, lustful, greedy jealousy, full of wrath and a love for sexual violation, violence, war, and crime. A mono-macho masculine way of life that targets the female simply because she will do virtually anything to become a part, to be accepted within a cultural or subcultural norm, even if that norm diametrically opposes her holistic living existence as the first Genesis offspring. These are the factors that have put man, he, and she in a bind at this state of our existence. And using she automatically keeps that nature of toxic disorder rolling, producing lower and lesser states of beings in every offspring born off of she. And it continues a downward spiral into oblivious nothingness.
There's some deep-seated program that you must let go, and we don't have any time to waste anymore. With dollar hooper holler and a lot of to do, use this supreme truth to step 2. Who betrayed the garden culture, Abel or Cain? Who made the burnt offering in their God's name? Who is the God of the folks who used Brother Cain as a scapegoat? Who are the disciples and the followers who would take the supreme truth and have it rewrote, establishing a pale-male war god culture who would rape, murder, enslave, and spook folks? Who would orchestrate truth to deceive anyone who would come to believe the 666 alliance about Adam and Eve?
We have to recover. She has been placed in a state and condition of thinking, reasoning, and actions that keep her doing whatever is necessary to do to be accepted, regardless of the long-term or short-term hurt and harm. She is master programmed to be that agent that assists the primary perpetrators of opposition in their mission, keeping that masculine he under psychological lock and key, keeping him locked in a parallel that prevents his rising, as it is said, to prevent the rise of a green earth solar conscious masculine he. You see, the Lord of that lower and lesser nature of opposition energy is well aware that if the green earth solar conscious masculine he rises, it has every possibility of inspiring the resurrection of green earth solar conscious femininity. And it works very well. And she becomes locked in doing the things that she should do to keep her offsprings, and any possibility of a resurrecting ancestral male from rising into the soulful essence necessary to go forward and multiply divine social, economic, family, communal order. The masculine he finds his being locked in a state of looking at her as his worst nightmare, forgetting that he's born off of she, and in fact, it is he who ejaculate the fertilizing semen and sperm into she that initiates his contribution to a birthing process that requires 2 parts to one wholeness, he and she, regardless of his level and degree of awareness. If disorder prevails, he becomes a partner in crime, in upholding and maintaining that oppositional master program. And this master program will continue into perpetuity until or unless a miraculous detox, purging, and healing process occur for the both of them, he and she. And in the meantime, the best that comes out of this oppositional nature of relating with each other is some kind and type of predatorial sexual relationship, nothing less than a fantasized romantic dream that continues to be deferred, never ever occurred outside of one's lost and astray state of mind, that leads to a bitter end time after time after time. A bitter end that leaves single-parent relationships where offsprings have very little to no identification of an ancestral father spirit, and actually uphold and maintain a sense of grievance against mother in a game of divide, conquer, separate, and rule by any means deemed necessary. Eldership is a foreign matter of fact with so many. Until or unless we establish a method of detoxing and purging so as to heal from this lower and lesser nature of opposition to our sacred ancestral presence, the downward spiral is all that awaits, nothing less than an apocalyptic doom of hell and damnation. And we're not talking about some religious syndrome. We're talking about universal order, truth, and consequence in thought and reasoning and action. And it's spelled out continuously on an ongoing basis through the kinds and types of masculine and feminine relationships that has become the norm in these days. Unable to interface with each other, remaining in a conflict, confusing, chaotic state of bitter hate and harm for one's self, for one's mate, and conflicting relationships with one's offsprings. Parenting realities have become so lower and lesser. Ancestral eldership, an unknown factor. And the bottom line is, each and every being continue that downward spiral, blaming the other, never ever realizing what it will take to rise up from this nature of opposition to divine order, spearheaded by a macho nature of energy that thrive and survive on blood spill, the thrill of the kill, war.
Who would orchestrate truth to deceive anyone who would come to believe the 666 alliance about Adam and Eve? And the 666 God said, in the beginning was the Word. And there be a declaration of war against the keepers of the word. And in truth and reality, the keepers of the words were the keeper, the most supreme truth, far beyond the syllables of the word. And the keepers of supreme truth, far beyond the word, was raided, invaded, murdered, raped, and slaved. And the word was stolen, and the truth was reversed, and the word become deception, and deception become the word. And this is exactly what Adam and Eve heard.
There was, is, and remain a most supreme seen and unseen essence of all that we be. There remains divine order, regardless of the fact that there is a manifestation of an opposing nature of energy, disorder. We must comprehend that our primary goal and objective is to resurrect, reconnect with our sacred ancestral origin. In the beginning of our first beginning, of that beginning, was a first intercourse. And that intercourse did manifest within and among the most supreme unseen essence of masculine and feminine energy. And that engagement was unquestionably of a love supreme. And from the manifestation of that first intercourse came that big bang that forwarded the first genesis of man, he, and she in divine order. Our essence as man, he, and she is that holistic living connection, soul to soul, whole soul energy, created in the image of the most supreme essence of masculine and feminine energy in his and her own image, of his and her own likeness, within his and her own kind, a divine social, economic, family, communal state of mind. Anything that deviates from that is disorder.
And this is exactly what Adam and Eve heard. And a ventriloquist-like voice was projected, and Eve heard the word. And after being tricked and deceived, Adam would hear the other voice that pointed the finger at Eve. And one would be seen as evil, always ready to follow disorder, leading man into temptation, profiled as the devil's daughter.
And that disorder is a manifestation of self-deifying individualism, an opposing nature to divine social, economic, family, communal order. Once we are clear about this, we can then comprehend why we, as man, he and she, was given the gift of going forward to multiply divine order into every offspring and vibration of the generation next in our own image in divine order, of our own kind in divine order, of our own holistic living state of mind within divine social, economic, family, communal order. And therefore, deviation becomes very clear.
And one will be cursed to give birth in toil and suffering pains upon the earth. You see, here before the thing was man-made, as Eve was born out of Adam's rib cage. Oh yes, let us not forget, they were led out of the sacred garden culture and into a culture of war and crime. And they will learn to hunt and herd and slaughter and kill. Flesh and blood is how they would die.
We were given the fruits of the tree of life to consume from. And those precious gifts of whole life fueling energy serve as our medicine, as our fueling source, and actually gives us the breath of life. There is a holistic living connection with the tree of life, green earth, solar consciousness, man, he and she, and all living things thereof, interconnected. The supreme order of earth, wind, rain, and sun as a manifestation of a greater divine, social, economic, family, communal order. The problem is that opposing nature of this order shows very little to no respect for Mother Earth, desecrating the air, water, and soil with no regard for any other living thing beyond its deifying self.
What kind of God is this that would declare this opposite energy culture as divine, choosing of the slaughter and the burnt flesh of death instead of the fruits of the trees of life, and declaring this burnt offering as his first choice way to die?
That nature of self-deifying individualism that did not emerge within the green earth solar conscious presence, but rather emerged in cold, barren, and blighted state and conditions of snow and ice, deforestation, and desertification. Nevertheless, regardless of the environmental factors that affected one's birth, each and every man, he and she, is connected with that mitochondrial mother, connected with that most supreme seen and unseen essence of our origin. However, a deviation, being out of sync, out of focus, out of time with whole life reality, did manifest. And those caught in that manifestation of toxic disorder did mutate and degenerate, or did assimilate, integrate, and adopt as a result of encountering the I came, I saw, I conquered syndrome that manifests into a conflict, confusion-oriented, chaotic state of being. This I came, I saw, I conquered syndrome has adversely affected the mass majority of man, he, and she, regardless of one's social, economic, political, or religious environmental factors, regardless of one's attitudes, values, behaviors, and beliefs thereof. We all have become a product of this intrusive and invasive nature of energy that diametrically oppose our sacred ancestral spirit-conscious presence as first Genesis offsprings. Regardless of who, why, when, and where any one of us emerged out of, we have a common divine natural innate duty, obligation, responsibility to instigate a detox, purging, and healing process. What is it that we should be focused on detox, purging, and healing from? There is a question, and we must answer this wholeheartedly and sincerely.
What kind of God is this that would declare this opposite energy culture as divine, choosing of the slaughter and the burnt flesh of death instead of the fruits of the trees of life, and declaring this burnt offering as his first choice way to die? Who betrayed the garden culture, Abel or Cain? Who declared a burnt offering in the God's name? What kind of energy is the possessor of this God?
A mono-macho masculine energy of self-deification, glorifying the I, me, my, mine syndrome, an ego drive that actually perpetuates sexual violation, violence, war, and crime as a way of life encoded into the DNA of every offspring and vibration, birthed and fed off of this lower and lesser nature of energy, totally and absolutely opposed to our green earth solar conscious origin. You see, we manifested as green earth solar conscious beings, consuming of the sacred garden culture from which we come, river valley, family communities, higher peace conscious, oriented, seeking, searching to uphold and maintain divine order by every means divinely necessary. Therefore, the goal and objective remains as it was in the beginning, in that first Genesis, of forwarding a greater sense of holistic living, thought, reasoning, and action into every offspring and vibration of the generation next. Our divine, natural, innate duty, obligation, responsibility as the masculine he is to uphold and maintain an order that divinely guide and protect the women and the children, and that sacred ancestral feminine she is to holistically nurture the essence of divine social, economic, family, communal order. If that natural and innate state of being is reversed, twisted into an opposing nature of energy, that feminine she will then be twisted into becoming the primary agent of that nature that opposes the existence of all that she birthed. This will cause such a shift and a change within the existence of man, he, and she, that he would no longer know the primary essence of she, and she would no longer know the primary essence of he, and it would become so mixed and mingled, twisted, to the point that it will not matter. One will self-deify and declare one to be whatever, however, whenever, whoever one wished to be. In fact, one is openly free to declare oneself to be a he or she or whatever sparks one's interest at that time, regardless of one's natural and innate biological factors. Obviously, this would be part of a second Genesis reality, a second Genesis nature of energy that opposed the natural and innate state of divine order, and that neither the first man nor the first woman had a mother. He, the male, would be created from the breath of the second Genesis deity blowing dust, and she would be birthed from the rib of that man who had become very lonely after witnessing all of the animals who had been created as he and she, mating with each other. We make note that within the origin of our first Genesis, the term man actually meant he and she, humanity, a living species that requires masculine and feminine energy to reproduce in our own image, of our own likeness, of our own kind, within divine order. However, within the second Genesis, man referred to he, excluding she. So it was, and so it continues to be, under the guise and disguise of that second Genesis mentality. And one would believe this, and one would then take that belief system and encode it into the generation next.
Who would orchestrate truth to deceive anyone who would come to believe the 666 alliance about Adam and Eve?
Man, he and she, of the first Genesis mentality, must come to the realization that the mass majority of he and she are living in a second Genesis reality, where sexual violation, violence, war, and crime is the root, foundation, and base of its existence. It is an absolute fact that this second Genesis reality fuels off of the life energy of humanity through slaughter, blood spill, and burnt offerings. And that fueling source keeps the flames of conflict, confusion, and chaos burning. We are identifying an opposing nature of energy that requires sacrifice of life energy to exist. And this, we must focus our whole life energy on recovering from. And to do that, we must devote a greater level and degree of attention to the teachings left us by that sacred ancestral Kemetic priesthood. You see, supreme truth remains supreme truth. The fact do not change, be it divine order or disorder. Supreme truth within divine order remains supreme truth. And likewise, supreme truth within disorder remains supreme truth, regardless of one's belief system. If you step out of sync and out of focus and out of alignment with whole life reality, with supreme truth of our first Genesis origin as plant-based tree of life consumers from the first food chain of life, if you have fallen out of sync with the supreme truth about our first Genesis origin as man, he, and she, emerging upon the scene from the most supreme unseen essence of masculine and feminine energy within the divine union of oneness. If you have fallen out of sync with the supreme truth about our first Genesis origin as man, he, and she, going forward to multiply that divine union of masculine and feminine energy, he and she, into every offspring and vibration of the generation next, hear I will, if you have fallen out of sync with supreme truth about divine, socio-economic, family, communal order, you have actually been misled into a second Genesis nature of self-deifying consciousness. And as such, be clear that that second Genesis nature of energy established a blockade, a barricade to prevent your re-entry into the supreme presence of our first Genesis, sacred garden cultural reality, and therefore you will remain locked out of green earth solar consciousness until you are able to align with a detox purging and healing process intense enough to recover from the mind-bending generational trauma transmitted through the DNA into the subconscious. It is then no wonder that a balanced, wholesome, and healthy relationship between man, he, and she is such a difficult challenge to undertake if he or she has not been properly prepared through strong, vibrant family communal relationships that put an emphasis on collective conscious communal sisterhood, collective conscious communal brotherhood with a purpose of bonding into the unified presence of strong parenting relationships, guided, protected, and nurtured by sacred ancestral eldership with the objective of fueling a wholesome generation next. And what we're seeing upon the planet at this particular point in time is the truth and consequence that has manifested as a result of an intrusive and an invasive oppositional nature of energy, an energy that has possessed those lost and astray populations who have then become the primary agents to perpetuate that toxic and foul nature of disorder into every offspring and vibration encountered. And any way it go, suffering, grueling, misery, aches, and pain is the order of the day. Regardless of how much financial wealth, regardless of what one perceive or believe to be truth in their theories, their practices, or their belief system about race, creed, color, sex, national origin. What is absolute fact? It is not about the color of one's skin, but rather about the state of consciousness that one lives within. So we had better put every ounce of our whole life energy into recovering divine order, seeking to connect with that tree of life culture, planting more trees, creating more gardens, eating more raw and living fruits, vegetables, seeds, nuts, herbs, and spice, connecting with a greater sense of divine union, masculine and feminine energy, and putting our holistic living focus on going forward to multiply in our own image, in divine of our own kind, within our own green earth solar conscious state of mind. We're talking about actually receiving that first Genesis consciousness, the sacred ancestral calling during these prophetic times is for a sacred few of the few to gather in thought and reasoning, prepared to take the kind and type of actions necessary to recover. We're talking about establishing selective matehood relationships with the full intention of selectively breeding, seeding, and feeding our first Genesis consciousness into the generations next. You see, there's a prophecy, 9/18/2027, and we have a period of time by prophetic revealing to connect holistically within divine, social, economic, family, communal order for the survival of the sacred ancestral spirit presence, man, he, and she. Applying the work, going through the detox, purging, and healing process to see the change, and in order to see that change, to become that change in divine order.
Now take this truth and step on.
Before you say you need something, just step to better